I'll kick it off. And the reason why we put your films together, so Alison and I work really hard to, as films come in, to really curate thematically and really give our audiences the opportunity to sort of see a holistic view and approach to certain types of themes. We do it with our shorts films, we do it with our shorts that go before our features. And so for this particular block, we really were looking at your films as a way and a theme about fighting back, right? And a theme about, there are multiple messages that are often connected with your films, and the underlying theme about not having a voice, and then giving sort of like voice to the voiceless, and redirecting the narrative, which is really important because oftentimes the narrative that we're seeing is the narrative in mainstream media. And so one of the things about this block is really about that, is really about, how Stonebreakers really looks at what is a monument? What does that mean? And what are the current day monuments we're looking at, so that we can flip that narrative about, the stories that aren't being told, and how to reclaim those stories, whether it's from the African-American perspective, the Native American perspective, or any perspective from a voice that's been silenced for a really long time. And I think with the Black farmers, it's the same way. It's about reclaiming that space and about understanding what we need to do as Black people to understand what the South is and what it means. And it's not, it is a painful space, but it's also a way to reimagine it and relook at it as a way to reclaim that. And for higher power, it's really interesting, Dewey, because you used cannabis and the reason behind not being able to legalize it, because Washington has this major issue that it's not a state. But yet there are people that have lived there their whole lives. And I don't think we all realize that the rights that you have, and trying to claim those rights, not even reclaim them, but claim them and have a voice in the country, because you don't have representation, is trying to bring that voice forward, and using cannabis to do that. So I think that Alison and I really felt like these all things had that sort of theme. So, I think one of maybe a way to start it off is, each one of you to really talk about why these films were really important for you to make, and what did you see that wasn't in the landscape of the film world or the media world, that you felt it was really important for you to take on this subject matter and share these really important issues and have really important conversations about the work that you produce. So I'm going to start with Dewey.
Thank you. I think that's a great question, an important one. And first, I think, hearing about everyone's films, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like everyone is documenting something that's happening in real time. And it's very different from documenting something in the past. And so when we were actually began shooting, I think Eleanor Holmes Norton had passed the bill to make DC a state in Congress the first time already. And while we were shooting, it passed the second time. And we knew it was important to document this because we were at a time where rights were being taken away. We're still seeing rights being taken away. And statehood, we see a lot of white supremacists talking about don't tread on me, don't tread on my rights. And you have 700,000 citizens in this country who have their rights treaded on every single day. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, but the Congress just tried to pass a bill that will prevent Washingtonians from implementing a new criminal code. We were trying to lessen the sentencing for nonviolent drug crimes, and Congress tried to block that. And so it's continuously happening on a large scale, and statehood would prevent that. And most importantly, statehood will give us 2 senators. And the Senate, one of the things I learned in this film is having a senator is one of the most important votes you can make. To me, it's more important than the president, because a senator fights for funding for your state, supports your state in getting certain tax breaks. There's all these kind of intangible things that get caught up in the minutia of law and passing laws. A senator does, and it's just one of the things we don't have. And the second part of that question is, I looked on the landscape as a cannabis advocate and user, and I saw not many documentaries that highlighted everyday Black people. Usually it was celebrities, and there's no shade to them, but normally it's celebrities or musicians kind of taking you through a history of cannabis, but never really talking about everyday people in cannabis, everyday Black people in cannabis. So that was a secondary importance to me, is to make sure that we laid out succinctly the importance of statehood, how it related to cannabis, and how everyday Washingtonian, Black Washingtonians are faring in it.
Great. Valeria, I want to go to you next because of your film Stonebreakers. And, you know, it's funny because you're not American, right? But you saw this really, that no one was really talking about this in the sort of way that your film talks about, you know, this history we have about putting up like Confederate statues. And I think someone said, like, why are we putting up statues for people who lose? You know, I mean, and your film, and I love, Dewey, what you said about that everyone's making films about things in real time. So can you just talk a little bit about your film, and about, we're talking about the history, but you bring it all present day with the memorials to George Floyd, the, you know, Dakota with the Native American population, and really marrying those two together. And the great thing about your film too is it's very cinema verite. So people are really speaking for themselves. You're not speaking for them.
Right. I guess you ask now why we started to doing this project, but I guess it really was a sense of urgency that we had. May 2020, I was here in New York City, and for us, and I think I can speak for Dewey and Eterno about this, that you really feel that sense of urgency to document what was going on. It was really an exceptional period in US history. And I was working actually on a film on Christopher Columbus before. As an Italian, I came to this project probably with this. This was my access to this story, because as an Italian, I was always very interested and curious to know more about the symbol that is really celebrated a lot in United States and among the Italian American community. It's not as celebrated in Italy instead. And this was a project that we started in 2016. I was also following the protest against Columbus, that of course did not start in 2020. They have, you know, deeper roots and a long history of opposition by indigenous communities to the symbol, to the statues, and especially the federal holiday, Columbus Day. But then, of course, when, you know, George Floyd killing happened and the protests took the streets, we really wanted to expand on that project on Columbus to also widen the scope to other symbols, other statues. And of course, you mentioned Confederate statue, but as well, Founding Fathers. We have a scene at the border with Mexico. We have a scene with a border wall. The idea was really to, you know, just following what the activists were doing themselves. They were the one connecting all those symbols with each other. And I guess we wanted to make a film that could look at this, at the struggles from, you know, from this higher ground, and see how all those fights and struggles were connecting to each other. So of course it was important to cover the removal of statues and then the protest, but as well it was important for us to highlight that there was also a moment in which communities were rediscovering space of memory that has been forgotten, or maybe perhaps not forgotten by those communities, but they were not on the map, you could say. They were not part of the mainstream historical narrative. And it was also a moment where, we saw also the erection of new monuments, of new space of memories. So overall, it was really, as I said before, a sense of urgency, but also a way of also kind of go a little bit beyond what you will hear in the mainstream media, and especially from the critics, from the Republican side, where you remember Trump was very strong on this. They were saying that what we were witnessing was an erasure of the past, an erasure of our American history. And what was true for us was really the opposite. It was really a way of talk about history in a way that probably in this country was never done before. It was a way to recover those memories of this brutality that happened in terms of, the slavery, of course, and then the treatment of the African American community and the indigenous community, the genocide that happens. Those are a whole chapter of history that we have to face. We don't need to bury it in somewhere. And what happened is that those monuments and the attack of monuments was a way, a passepartout, a key to really open this important conversation that in this country we never had. So yeah, overall it was really just a great experience to be able to capture this important moment and really link what the past and the present, and how activism nowadays, the activist people that were fighting on those monuments were really using the past and using the memory to fight really present battles in the present day, because at the end it was always been about changing the present, changing the systematic racism that we have in this country, and history. I was really interested in this and see how history can help in changing the present.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really interesting in the film too, and you talked about sort of like rediscovering this place of memory that we've forgotten, right? That oftentimes, I think I had said something about like, why can't we just leave the statues up and then put a monument there something next to it that says, here's another history, like art museums do, and it was sort of like gave people the opportunity to go to these spaces and understand that they're their spaces, that those were spaces that were taken from Native American communities, African American communities, that you have a right to those spaces. So I think the film touches on that, and that importance of empowering a community to say, this is the history we want to see. This is what we need. This is what we want, to reclaiming that. So I want to go to Eternal and Tharlyn now to really talk about that whole reclamation, or that whole understanding of space in the South. And I thought it was really interesting in the documentary that, you talk about the pain that African Americans have about the South, that, they fled, to the northern cities, getting away from that oppression. But we have to understand, as African American people, that the South is really important to who we are as a nation.
Absolutely. Colonel, do you want to take it, or you want me to take it first?
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, I'll take it, and I'll let him as the filmmaker come in. But I think you're absolutely right. I think, the biggest thing is that, we are just connected to the land. And you're right, we as African Americans many of us did migrate to the North for a better life, for a better social standing, but we are still connected to the South. We're still connected to our families, and we're still connected to that parcel of land that many of us still share. We still share with families, we still share with our heirs. And for many of us, it is still an emotional quest for us. And because of that, that is what makes this film, which makes this documentary, which makes Heirs Property, which makes this such an emotional journey. these families, many of us that are now North, still have a connection to the South, still have a connection to this. And many families that don't even know that they're part of this heirs property journey are connected. So that's why it's so important in this film that we build awareness, that we have a call to action, and that we have a voice and activate folks when it comes to that. It is tremendously important. And more than that, it is just simply emotional, because much of the land that we speak about is precious. It is in turmoil. Much of it is lost. And, you know, it only takes one conversation with a person, with an adult, with a grown man, to see them cry over the legacy that has either been shattered, taken away, or lost. And so it is simply, you know, you look at the film early on and look at Charles Sherrod and you know, look at the journey and how he went in the woods and had to cry over losing his land. Those are powerful statements, and those are things that are going on right now. And so we just hope that through the lens of this film, we, one, are bringing awareness to this issue, but more than that, we're activating folks to come to a resolution or turn the corner when it comes to heirs property.
And for me, coming to this film, there were so many different I guess currents running through the conversation about land ownership and wealth and legacy and family and culture. Like, there were so many of these sort of currents that were coming through. But the biggest thing for me was I had no idea about this. And it was the thing that something that was so detrimental to, you know, to our legacy in this country was just widely unknown from a lot of people. But when I started talking to people about it, like, and I didn't have to mention heirs property, I just had to mention having your land taken away. Right. Somebody's like, oh, we're going through that right now. Or when I started to describe it, people started saying, yo, that's exactly what's going on. As a point of fact, I just came from a summit in LA, and I was on a panel, and I got off the panel, and this woman came up to me, and we were just randomly talking. She says, why are you here? And I'm like, oh, I have this film, Gaining Ground. She said, well, what's it about? And I said, well, it's about this thing called heirs property. She says, oh my God, we're going through that right now. And the next day I saw her, she said, I called a family meeting. As soon as I left you, I went home and called a family meeting, because the information you told me at that moment just let me know that how serious this was for our family to just get a hold of it. And so the thing that you mentioned about the pain of the South, the what we endured and what we left, I wanted to really address some of those things head on. And it wasn't just about numbers like the money or the number of acres, but it's like, let's get to the reasons why these things happen, because there's the idea that, you know, we don't care about these things, you know, and that this is important to us. But I really wanted to address that head on and get into that conversation that we don't always have about. We were terrorized off of the land a lot. We were cheated and tricked out of the land a lot. There was a systematic effort to take land, whether it was like threat or if it was like, hey, as soon as I let somebody know I have land, then that lawyer that I talked to knows the county clerk, and they know the developer.
And the one good point to make is that this is not past tense. It's not tricked. This is present day. So that's another very good point to make, is that these things are happening right now in real time.
And to your point, there was an article that you can look it up, recently came out of New York. They're using the heirs property tactic to get brownstones from people when someone passes, and like the matriarch owns the brownstone, she passes, the kids get it, and then no one said, here's the clear title, here's a will, so that it's being used in urban environments as well. I really felt a duty to kind of approach it, display that conversation, and kind of have the counter conversation, which is whether you're farming on land or not, you need to be connected to it. I believe it's the source of our healing and the source of us coming together. And if you think about what people in the 1800s, like imagine someone a couple of decades outside of slavery owning like 3,000 or 4,000 acres of land. They didn't look at land purchases like, oh, I'm going to flip this, or I'm going to put a resort on it. They were like, this will be for our family forever. This will be the foundation by which we build our legacy. And to have that ripped away, tricked away, stolen or threatened away, to me was just like the travesty, and getting people, and most people don't know that there are resources.
Right.
There are helping people out there. And so that was really key for me to communicate, and really, I think the biggest purpose of this film was to communicate there is help, and there are resources, and there's a community of people that are going through the same thing, and then now you can lean on each other and get help, so you can preserve your land and legacy.
And I think that, you know, when I first watched it, it was also good to kind of have that historical perspective of, you know, because we know we left, but you know, but it's like so many people that I know have this, you know, they're like, oh, I own this land in South Carolina with 15 of my relatives, and half of them I don't know. So I thought this is really important because it's new, but I also think that it would also resonate with people who live in the city, who similar things are happening to, whether it's the plot next to them that they were able to get because the city gave it to them, you know, years back, but now the city wants it back, or a developer wants it back. So I think that it's really important.
Alison, you make a very good point that we speak a lot about the South. This is not just a Southern issue, whereas predominantly in the South, but we want to make that point that it is an heirs property can be anywhere, right? So we want to make sure that we make that point. And we want to also make sure that we don't point the finger at our ancestors because they thought they were doing the right thing.
They didn't know.
And they didn't know. And we also want to make that point that leaving it to my family, they think that was the right thing to do. So we also want to make sure that we are making that point very clear.
But I also feel like for some of the films too, there's also, it's not just like the tricks of the people who want the land, it's also our government. You know, our
that's what I was going to say.
Our government has set up systems.
That's a whole, whole,
I mean,
we could be on this call for another 3 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly, Al. That's what I was going to say. For all of your films, they all focus on, you know, government and about like having to push through governments or toppling governments, or, you know, having that
the ones who are making decisions that
affect your lives.
Or enable us to keep what is ours, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, this whole story of the South and not liking the South and feeling sort of you know, maybe not trapped by it as, you know, going back. I always say I'm never going back below the Mason-Dixon line, but that's not true because I love to garden and I love to farm. So maybe I'll buy a plot, or else maybe we'll do that after, you know, we retire. But part of that history too, and just about Stonebreakers, is because, you know, the story that's told down there are all of these statues or all of these people that oppressed Black and brown people. Why do I want to be in that space where it's like you're walking by and you're seeing all these people that did all these things to you, whether it's, you know, and so I think that's an interesting part of our feeling in living in this world and living in the States.
You know, and I'm kind of curious too about Washington, because we know you guys aren't can't are a state, but it never occurred to me how much voice that you don't have. Living in DC, and how just like with Stonebreakers and the monuments, and just like the farmland, it's like these things are there are loopholes in everything that
Exactly.
make it impossible for us to move on, right?
So Valerio, right. Yeah. And Valerio, you did, you focused a lot on New England because of Columbus, but you were in the South and you were in South Dakota.
Yes, we filmed, of course, all the protests against the Confederates monuments in Monument Avenue in Richmond. And we went a little bit outside Richmond in Virginia. We look at how also slavery is remembered in the landscape. And it's not just about monuments and statues, but it's also about other signs that you could see, public signs that marks perhaps a battleground where there was the Union army fighting the Confederates army, or even those plantation houses that are now, sometimes they do a great job and they have museums and they have public history, but in other times it's also another way of trivializing history. And sometimes, you'll see other kind of experience like the spooky tour and all of that stuff. So for us, it's important. What was important to look at history and the monuments, but also those other way of how history is told in the landscape. And of course, in South Dakota, it's another example of how history is described and is distorted in a way, not just through big monuments, but also through the commercial enterprise that surround Mount Rushmore. The Black Hills it's a land almost like historic Disneyland, if you go, a little bit of a Fantasia, where that is built on this American myth, of the Western conquest, and that it's all lie pretty much, and it's being fought by the Lakota nations that live in Pine Ridge Reservation, but also in Rapid City. And there are a group of activists that actively go against this kind of representation.
Right.
But it's important at the end that we realize, I think one of the main realization that we made with this film is that monuments and statues, they are not history. They are statement of power in the public space. And that's why we really need to understand that, as there was an arbitrarial, and maybe there was a decision to put them there from up, that we need to understand that it could be a push from the bottom that renegotiate that meanings and the symbol. It's normal as being part of, our history of human history for centuries. Statues and monuments are there to be interrogated. And this is important. It's something that is an approach that we need to have towards history at large. History is not something that we need to store in a monument and leave it there, freeze it. No, it's something that we need to constantly interrogate. It's something that we need to be part of in the present, actualize it. And those fights of the activists of the Black Lives Matter that we witnessed in 2020 show us a way of how these things can be done and how change can be achieved through this.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So, I think the other thing about all of your films, and Dewey, if you can speak to this, is this whole, issue of activism. I feel like we had the 60s, which is like such an important part of our activist life. And then it was like, oh, great. Thanks so much for doing all that for us. And we sort of like sat down for a little bit. And now, we're seeing that resurgence of activism, which is really making a difference and making a change and unapologetically getting up there and saying, we're not going to put up with this anymore. How that seems incredibly important for higher power and statehood, and even, this whole conversation around cannabis and justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I love about Washington, D.C. is the rich cultural Black history here. They are proud of it. They don't shy away from it. And you see it in every aspect of the city, from the artwork to the businesses, to the statues, to the naming of streets. You know, Valerio, you made a good point that, you know, that monuments aren't statues or statements of power. And even though we are in this, surrounded by all these federal monuments, you know, you go around the city and there are statues of Black people within the city. And so you saying that hits a point to me like, yeah, that's actually true. And you drive around this city, in the city, and you see that, you know, all across the landscape. And I think that's why Washingtonians are so activated. And, you know, I mean, think about it like this. Washingtonians didn't have the right to elect their own mayor until 1972, really 1973 when it passed, and they elected Walter Washington. They were able to elect their own council. Before that, Congress picked the mayor. So think about that. Congress picks who governs this area, you know. And
it's predominantly African-American.
Predominantly African-American. And, you know, it's changed a lot now where it's, you know, it's like 51-49 now, but at one point it was 70-80% African-American. And we even talk about in the film that now, because there's more white people, there's, you know, there's more acceptance of statehood. And that's something that we have to reckon with. But even the white people within the city do not reject the rich cultural Black history here. They understand it and identify with it. The people that call themselves Washingtonians, not those that are kind of elected and spend time here doing their political business. And that's what impressed me most about DC is just the rich cultural history, the history of activism, and they understand the importance of this fight. And that's why I'm really in awe of Washingtonians and proud to make this film, because I see what happens when people have pride in their history. They go out and they fight and they fight for equity, they fight for equality, and they'll tell you all the time. You ask any person on the street, we pay the highest federal taxes in the nation, you know, and we don't have representation. People are educated about their history. They're in the public schools. They have to take a class on the history of Washington, D.C. And so that to me is phenomenal, because I'm from Columbus, Ohio. We didn't take a class about the history of Columbus, Ohio. You know, Valerio, you make a great point about Christopher Columbus. I grew up thinking Christopher Columbus was, you know, this, you know, prolific guy who did no wrong. And you read more information and understand more about history, and you say, no, it's very interesting that we are celebrating this figure who has a really horrid past that we don't like to talk about, you know? And I think the thing about history in these films is that it is important to talk about the legacies of this country and how we got here. And it's the only way we can fight against repeating the mistakes of the past. And, you know, every one of these films I'm listening to, it's like, yes, it's in real time, but we're all rooted in a history. And it feels like that these films are being made by you all and by myself to make a real difference. And so, you know, that's why I think these films are important.
Well, and I mean, especially now, right? When we have all this cancel culture and they're taking books out of schools and you're not allowed to see certain things. And, you know, you have legislators and states that are, you know, making these decisions about what kids are going to learn and what they're not going to learn. I mean, granted, when we were growing up, we learned all the other side of the history and weren't really allowed to. We learned about Harriet Tubman, of course, but nothing else. And that's why, you know, for me, documentary films, these types of films are so important for me to see, but also for us to bring to RoxFilm, because I can't tell you how many times people come out of a film and go, I had no idea. Or that Alison and I will be, you know, doing as we're going through curating, I had no idea. And that's what's really important. If we can help make the difference, if we can help bring your vision to, you know, a greater audience, then there are more people that can, you know, be a part of that fight.
And I also think that, you know, so in the streaming, all your films are together. So if people buy one ticket, they're going to see all three. And we usually don't do that with features, but we just thought that these were great films to see together. And I liked what you guys were saying too about resources, and certainly we can provide resources for people and put them on our website, because like I was saying, people don't know. They're saying, I own this with 15 of my family members, like what's going to happen? Or this guy in the South End here, who, just like you were talking about, Eternal, he passed away and there were people lined up at the door to take his place away, and it just can go like this. And I think that we just need to be really kind of vigilant. And I think all of these films really made us feel like we still continue to have to be vigilant about things not being taken away from us.
And Dewey talked about the history of Washington, and when I kind of delved into this conversation a little bit, I had so many questions. Like, the biggest stat that stood out to me was that by 1910, that Black Americans had 20 million acres of land. I'm like, wait a minute.
Where?
I'm like, wait a minute, 50 years outside of slavery, 20 million acres of land. And so my head just started spinning, like, how did this happen? How did that happen? In doing the research, I saw footage from, this was early 1900s. There was a minister, a Black minister, I want to say in the Midwest, like Oklahoma or something, who had a camera. He had a film camera, and he just filmed everyday Black life. Coming out of church, having, going to school, this was somebody back in the time of Oscar Michaud that had designs to be a filmmaker. So that's just interesting right there. But in one of the clips, they showed a Black family that had 2 oil wells, and I almost fell out the chair. I'm like, I'm looking at stuff from like the early 1900s with Black people with oil wells. And I'm like, what if we knew this stuff? What if we knew, like, the things that we accomplished, the things that we had, and the things that we were engaged in? Because it almost seems impossible right now. If I go to somebody and say, hey man, you can get an oil well, like, yeah, like, when does that happen? It actually happened very soon after the end of slavery. And so there were so many things that I was so curious about, and that's kind of what I brought to the conversation. But when you talk about the history of the land and how people feel about it, this is why I was intent on 2 things. It was, one was to make Black people look good. Wanted them to
and they
look
did.
good. And I wanted to make the land look good, because I wanted people to see America is beautiful. Racism makes it ugly. But the land, and this is why people want it and why they fight for it and why they're trying to preserve it, because when you're out in that, when you're on 127 acres and you're talking to Uncle Ira, and Uncle Ira's telling you about the first time he shot a gator, and they ate that gator, and how and then they're cooking a whole meal, and you're just seeing how that family comes together, and how, oh, my cousin got married to the neighbor across the street, and the other cousin lives on the same property. And you see that stuff, and you're like, man, this is something that we're missing.
Right.
Like, it's an integral part to not only our identity, but who we were even before coming to this country. Because a lot of Black folks were brought here specifically for their agricultural acumen. Rice, sweet potatoes, okra, all of this stuff we brought here. And for us to kind of like be disconnected from it, that was the thing for me that I really wanted to show, how that history is the thing that we're missing as well. And that's the thing that's the current that's running through all of these films, is that when we talk about the history being taken out of the class, that we have to put it into the content that we're creating, so that people can understand where we were in this whole conversation.
Yeah, we have to also remember that these forums like this, with Rox, that these are important, and that filmmakers are important, that awareness is important, and that speaking up is important. And not that these things didn't happen, is that this is such, you know, slavery did its part to us, right? And so much of what has happened to us, we've just kept, you know, in a cocoon. We didn't share, we didn't talk about it, but it didn't mean that those things didn't happen. And that is why it's important that we share knowledge, that we talk to one another, that we have these types of forums so that we can expose one another, because that's how you learn, that's how you teach. Because as we have these forums, then folks come up to you. When Eternal and I went in North Carolina at the film festival, most of our conversation in the forum took place after the forum.
Right.
Because it happened, you know, outside. It happened in the forum. So you just have to be willing to have the conversation and not be quiet, because what happened to us, the trauma of slavery, it was so traumatic that we just stayed in our own little space, and we just did not share the knowledge. Yes, as he said, we have oil wells, we have the land, it's there. And when we talk about heirs property, we have to make sure that we make it the point that this is the land is the people's lands. We're not talking about getting land that doesn't belong to them. It is their land. So we have to make sure that we make that point, that we're not trying to take land from someone else and give it to Black folks. We're not trying to do that at all. This is their land. We want to make sure that we are securing the land and making sure that we are making sure we have a path for them, that they are creating a legacy for the next generation and closing that wealth gap.
You know, that's really an interesting thing you say, because all of your films sort of talk about maybe sort of the white supremacy and the fear of, then you're going to take down my monument, or you're going to take my land, or you're going to make, you know, Washington an actual state where more Black people are going to vote for the Democratic Party or something, right? So it's very interesting that the pushback on so much of this is coming from that space of fear, of taking over something where it's not. It's really it's about, we're willing to, share, but we want what's ours, and we want to make sure that we're reclaiming that. You can have whatever you have, but
you took it without asking.
You took it without asking. It's like going to a museum.
The crazy thing is,
and we have to say what it is. And most times you stole it. So we can't just get politically correct. We can't pretty it up. We can't put makeup on it. You stole it.
And that's what I was going to say. The crazy thing is that this conversation is always about, you're going to take something from us when you did the taking.
But that's the erasure of history, right?
And we always have to try to solve a problem that we didn't create. And that's the other hard journey. That's the hard climb. That's the heavy lift for the African American community. Always trying to solve a problem that we did not create.
Exactly.
All right, so we could go on for this is such a great conversation, but we can't. And so Alison, did you want to close us out?
No, we just wanted to know what you guys are doing, and what is there, if there's any movement in any of your in any of your issues. And like I said, if you guys provide us with resources, we will certainly put them on our website. But this was very interesting. There was one thing though, that kept on coming up in the film. What is it? God doesn't make it anymore. It's like we have to preserve.
God doesn't make land anymore. Right.
No more.
I thought that was right. And I thought that was really, really interesting, because it's like, there isn't going to be a new anything.
No.
Right?
This is the land we have. Right.
This is it. This is it. So thank you so much for inviting us.
Yep. And so does anyone want to tell us what you're doing next, or talk about
what we can do for you, for your films? Yeah. And what you want people to take away, obviously, that's always that big question.
Well, I'll start. I just want to say thank you for the exposure. In Eternal, please chime in. But thank you very much for this opportunity and the exposure and selecting gaining ground for the film festival. I'll let you continue, Eternal.
Well, what I will say, just to kind of give a little kind of an update, one of the people in the film, Professor Thomas Mitchell, that man has been doing the Lord's work. And so that loophole is way more restrictive because he has been doing the work, and he had to sneak it in with the legislation in the wording, but it's now, I want to say, in 22 states and territories, and most of them are in the South. And so
he played their game.
Yes,
absolutely, with the Partition Act, absolutely.
And so for the resources on our website for the film, the microsite gaininggroundthefilm.com, we have the links to the organizations that are doing the work, including the Center for Heritage Property and Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And we just kind of did some tracking of the traffic. Whenever we talk about the site, the most clicked parts of the site are the links to the resources. So it is that is working. So
yes.
That part.
Yeah, and one point that we want to make clear is that we wanted to build awareness around this issue, but more than anything, it's the call to action, and it is the resources. And as Eternal mentioned, the microsite has the links to the resources and to the agencies and entities that can assist families. But we just want to make sure that activation, motivating folks, and motivating all to the resources that are available for families, landowners, and farmers.
Excellent. Valerio, what about you? And then we'll end with Dewey.
Sure. I think adding extra resources to the film streamings, I think it's a great idea, and I wish we could do that, during a film. Of course, it's not possible, but it's very important that we know and understand why those monuments were built, who made those monuments. Because you were saying, there is a lot of fear against changing the status quo, and monuments oftentimes, came and were built often to really kind of as a backlash in fear of some change. Look at statues of, if the Confederate statues, right? They were built not right after the Civil War, but a few years after, in the years of Jim Crow, to really reestablish white supremacy, because
or the wall.
Yeah, and look at Columbus. Columbus statues are now being held as a symbol of, as a backlash for changes. Italian Americans really, a lot of those, the biggest lobbyists of Italian American community, reactionary organization, they really are defending Columbus because he's really the symbol of, that's what we are. We don't want to change it because we don't want to listen to what other people have to say. We don't want this. American dreams that we achieved, right, to go away, and that's speaks volume for really, if you really have to question why you were able to achieve that dream, right, and other communities that have been there for longer times have not. And that's why I think, as you perfectly say, that it's really important to really look at the history and sometimes when I feel I'm screening this film in Italy, and people, sometimes I get the question of, why the Americans are so obsessed with looking at the past, and why don't move forward, go beyond and leave the present. And then what they don't understand, and I try to explain, and I hope this film can explain better than I can do, is really to show that fight in the past has never ended. And in the United States, in United States history, the fight for the past is truly linked to the present. And the issues of land, I think what you guys talk about, it is really the main issues, because it's true for African-American community, it's true for indigenous community, because this was land that was stolen from there. And looking at history, understanding what happened, really means correct wrongdoings that were done. It is possible. There is things that you can do. There are treaties that were not respected, and you can look at those treaties and revert some of those things. The issues of, the one that you were talking about with your film, with the land that were, you know, promised and then all the wrongdoings that were done legally with Black communities. So, I mean, there are concrete things that can be done in the present, and history is a way, and looking at history, understanding what really went, is a way of achieving that. So yeah, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to show at the festival, to reach out to, you know, to the audience, because it's really a conversation that needs to be gone.
Yeah, exactly.
First I want to thank you, Lisa and Allison, for having me. You were the first film festival that accepted one of my films so many moons ago. And I just feel a strong connection to you all. And it really is like coming home to family. And so I'm just really thankful that Higher Power is screening in your festival this year. Our call to action is very, very simple. Vote and question the people you're voting for about statehood. Your congressional representatives that are going to be running, the Senate representatives that are going to be running, question them about DC statehood and would they vote to make Washington, DC a state, and hold them accountable to those actions, because we can't vote for ourselves to be a state, right? That's not how it works. We don't have representation. It's up to the people. Yeah, it is. And it's up to the people in this country to vote the people in, vote in enough congressional representatives that the Democrats take back control, vote in enough senators that we can vote down the filibuster, and vote to make Washington, D.C. the 51st state of the United States of America. It would be the first majority Black state. And frankly, I think it will be, you can finally say that at least in the landlocked 50 states, and making it 51, our citizens have all the rights afforded to them by the Constitution. And right now, 700,000 citizens don't. And that's kind of like what it comes down to. There are 700,000 citizens in this country who do not have the full rights of citizenship that were afforded to them at birth.
And they live on the mainland.
They live in the mainland, yeah.
Well, great. Well, we thank you all for being here. And like I said, this will be added to the block, so people will be able to see the films and then see the Q&A. It will also live on our where, Lisa? YouTube channel?
Yes.
On our YouTube channel. So we appreciate your films. We want to thank you very much for making them, for letting us show them and giving them some time. And yeah. Anything else, Lisa?
No, I just wanted to say that I know your films are screening online, but that doesn't mean you can't come to the festival, Dewey. Colonel, you can still come and hang with us.
And talk to other filmmakers about your
film. Because as you know, film festivals are all about, and the filmmakers get online passes. So yeah, I just want to say thank you. This is probably our favorite part is bringing films like this to the festival and bring awareness. I think it's the most important thing we can do as Black people, as people of color, as as allies and accomplices that are going to help us, get these stories told. And I think this is the way we do it. Mainstream media is not. Independent films, and the work that you're doing is really, really important. And so for that, as Allison said, we really thank you for your work, and we will continue to champion it even beyond the festival. So if there's anything that we can do, the resources that we can attach to this, and have people make sure they're signing petitions or doing whatever, just let us know. But yes, a big thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.